Hello. Ooh, 1 minute past noon, according to me. Here in this time zone. Whew, made it. Had a whole bunch of things going on today, and you know what? Here we are, doing it. I'm just realizing, let's see, maybe I'll get my mic a little bit. Oh, but then it's like right in the middle of the thing. Then I look super fancy. There, let's pull it there. There we go. That's better. Woo! Ooh, here we are. We made it to another Friday. What? Another Friday. Yes, Friday, May the 6th. And welcome. Welcome to another live office hours with me, your host, Dr. Shannon Coates. And I am coming to you live from north of Toronto, in a little town north of Toronto, which are the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Mississauga, and the Wendake Neowensio peoples. And I wanted to just draw your attention to the fact that yesterday was, let me just make sure I get the accurate title in both Canada and the US, and I'm not sure about other parts of the world, but in Canada and the US, it was, in Canada we often call it Red Dress Day, but it was the National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirited People. So that is an incredible day of understanding and acknowledging what has happened and what continues to happen in Canada. I'll speak for Canada. I know very similar kinds of stats in the States as well, where Indigenous women and girls are targeted for violence at a much higher rate than other groups. So that is, you know what, I shouldn't say much higher rate. I am saying that off the top of my head. I don't have actual statistics. However, there is a high rate of violence targeted to Indigenous women and girls and two-spirited people. And so yesterday in particular was a day when we set aside to consider this. And so as part of that, I also wanted to recommend that if you haven't yet, something that you may be interested in listening to is a podcast called Missing and Murdered, Finding Cleo. And I'll put the links to those on this live office hours as well, but on Facebook and on Instagram. But that is a really eye-opening investigative journalist, a podcast by an investigative journalist looking for a child who was taken out of a home, out of their home in Saskatchewan here in Canada, and taken to the States, and as part of the 60s scoop. So that is, if that is all new information to you, and you perhaps aren't aware of what the 60s scoop is or was, and perhaps are unaware of the impact of adoption policies and how governments treated and thought about Native children and Indigenous children, that is something that you may want to take a look at. So I will put the links in, just FYI. Just for your information. So I took some notes on my phone just before I came here, so I'm going to look down a little bit just to make sure that I am saying all the things that I want to say. And today, let me come back to this screen. Excuse me for a minute. There we go. So today, I see in the background on Facebook, you're looking at my mirror on the floor there. That's an interesting little view in the corner there. Anyway, so today we're talking about eliciting feedback. And I titled this originally 3 Best Practices. So that's what I titled it originally. But as we've kind of talked about it a little bit this week, and as people have commented on, I put up a post about 5 ways to ask, how does that feel, without asking, how does that feel? And so as people have commented and talked about that, I'm likely gonna go a little bit beyond, like 3 best practices. We're gonna talk a little bit more. But the first thing I wanted to make sure I clarify, and this was brought to my attention by Robert Susuma, wonderful movement and voice person who, if you haven't checked, I'll tag him as well. So if you haven't checked out his stuff, I highly recommend, and he sort of pointed out that when I say, you're eliciting feedback by saying, how did that feel? Or some of the other directives, or some of the eliciting feedback questions that I suggested that you might want to consider using, especially if you're getting bored of the old, how does that feel? Things like, what did you observe? What changed for you? How successful was that on a scale of 1 to 10 or in a percentage? So all of those things that we use to elicit feedback are actually, we are eliciting feedback, right? We're getting information from the singer we're working with about how the process worked for them and what the outcome of the process was for them. So we're getting some information. So that is feedback that we're then taking in as teachers, and then we can build on that feedback, and we have a different, perhaps a little bit more information about where and how to move forward, and how to, how to build, basically. And we get some information into that student's process, right? And what's happening for them. So that's all terrific. But perhaps the more important thing that we are doing when we ask these kinds of questions is not actually eliciting feedback. What we're doing, more importantly, and I was conflating these two in my posts this week, but what we're doing more importantly is we are drawing students' attention or awareness to their process and to what's happening in their bodies and what is happening in total outcomes. So we're drawing students' attention to their process. And that is, I think, in fact, a more important reason to ask these questions and to elicit feedback, when really what we're doing is we're asking questions that allow the students we're working with, or the singers we're working with, to have a better understanding, yes, of their own process, right? And it also allows us, it gives us the opportunity to resist the temptation to impose a process. So when we ask questions about their process and we draw their awareness to their own process and we elicit feedback about their process from them, it will hopefully help us to resist the temptation to tell them what their process is, or to tell them what they should be feeling, or to tell them to download what the process is for them, or what the sensations are in that process. So I want to just, thank you, Robert. You're absolutely right. I was conflating those two things. And so I want to make sure that we're clear about the purpose. Why are we asking these questions? It is, yes, a little bit about us getting that information, but it's a lot about the students having attention drawn, or us allowing them to find, to observe their own process and find awareness of their process, right? So having said that, I want to also take a couple of steps back in terms of the way that we allow and work with students to support them in their process of finding awareness of their process, which is also agency, and this all ties in with student-centered or student-led learning. I want to take a couple of step backs and just be really clear about a few things. So it doesn't matter how good your eliciting feedback slash bringing awareness questions are, if the student is at the early learning stages. And I don't necessarily mean if they are at the early learning stages of singing. I mean if they are at the early stages of understanding their own learning process. If they're at the early stages of having agency over their own learning process. So if I ask, Natalie says, it also gives us really important information, yes, about the things they're thinking about, right? What do they have, where is their attention as they're singing? Yeah, it gives us terrific information. We are definitely eliciting feedback. So But we can have the best eliciting feedback slash drawing attention to directives and questions in the world. But if a student is at the beginning of their self-directed learning, so if they're at the beginning of that process, they will not have good answers for you. Not good, they will not be able to answer the question because they don't know yet how to do this kind of observation of themselves. They don't have the awareness. They don't have agency yet. They don't believe that they have agency yet. And this applies to this, I'm going to talk about sort of four steps in this kind of self-learning process or self-directed learning process. If a student comes to you and they're like 8 years old, so very young, or let's say immature young singers, are likely at the very beginning of this process. There aren't a lot of, if you're a child, you're not necessarily, for the most part, unless you're an exceptional child, you likely don't have a good understanding of what it feels like to be in my body and what things are happening in my body and being able to describe what's happening in my body. And also, you don't necessarily have the wherewithal, you don't necessarily are not independent enough in your own thinking from your caregivers, teachers, authorities in your life, to authority figures, in your life, to be able to say, this is what I feel, this is what I need, this is what is happening in me. So folks who are at the beginning of their self-directed learning process in age, just simply because of age, those are folks who often will not be able to answer those kinds of questions, who will not be able to give you responses, who will not be able, just simply cannot answer those questions. The other kinds of folks who are at the beginning of their self-directed learning process are just folks who have been in a Western education system for a long time, at whatever level, teenagers. Yes, and awareness of one's process can also apply to any students at any grade level, absolutely. So, you can have a singer coming into, you can have a singer who's in their, 70s or whatever, who is coming into the learning process and who's had lots of voice lessons, who's sung a lot, all of that, and has some great training, who are still at the beginning of their own self-directed learning journey. Age isn't necessarily a factor in terms of where we are in our self-directed learning journey. So, when we're asking these questions, when we're asking folks, when we're bringing awareness to processes in folks, yes, Jennifer says, I see university students who struggle with this all the time. Yes, and we're asking them, and they're singing at a high level, they're well trained, but they may not yet, there's so many reasons, right? There's so many reasons that we may not yet have a sense of self-directed learning or a sense of self or the ability to even describe what's happening in myself yet. There are lots of reasons. You could just be that kind of like personality type, right? You could be someone who it's never been modeled, so you just never thought about it. You didn't know it was an option, so you never thought about it. You may also have grown up in circumstances where the body and having needs and wants and being in touch with what my body is doing and what my body wants to do next and what my body might be telling me about a process is not a thing. That's not a thing. It's all about what am I thinking, right? It's all about what are you telling me to do, and then I will do the thing that you tell me to do, right? You may have grown up in a non-exploratory, I can take agency over my body kind of environment. And lots of folks are more prone to have grown up that way than others. There are certain groups that are certainly parts of the population that are certainly more prone to have grown up in that kind of environment than others. So this isn't just about age, right? This is about where am I in my own self-directed learning journey, or where is the student in front of me? And if they cannot answer questions such as, what do you observe? That's fine. That's not their fault. They're not a bad student. It's not a thing. It's just that they're at the beginning of the journey of understanding how to do this thing, how to actually see what's happening in my body. So let me outline. This is from educational models, and this is the staged self-directed learning model. I think this is by somebody Grow, I think their last name is. I will take a look at that and get a better link for you. But there are 4 stages. They talk about 4 stages in the self-directed learning model. And the first stage is that the student is dependent and the teacher is the authority or coach. And if you think about it, very often that is the way that singers come into our voice studio, and that's kind of where they stay. They stay in the first stage of self-directed learning, right? Even if we ask them a million questions, how does that feel? What changed for you? Blah, blah, blah. We may also then be saying, how did that feel for you? It seems like you did this, this, and this. Is that going to keep them? Is that if that's the beginning stage, terrific. You may want to have a little bit more of input into guiding their awareness, or you may want to ask more leading questions into guiding their awareness. You may want to say things like, did something change for you in the clarity of the sound? Was there a difference in the relaxation in your knees when you sang that song? Do you feel like you were able to communicate more anger in that song? Do you feel like, so you at that beginning stage, you are allowed to direct awareness in a kind of more direct way, if you will, right? You're allowed to ask the question and direct things, and you're allowed to also say, so from what I heard or how it seemed to me, of course, not right away, but afterwards. So you're allowed, and it is appropriate to do this kind of a little bit of directed direction. Because that's the beginning stage. The issue is, the problem is that so many of us as we were training, and then right now the way we're teaching, stay in that first stage, and we keep our students in that first stage. So we stay as the authority or coach, and the student stays as dependent on you. So they stay in the stage of like, they don't know whether it was a successful sound or not. They don't know whether it was a successful coordination or not. They don't know whether they used appropriate energy or not, because you're the one who's telling them all the things. And sometimes we bat students back from, they might be 2 or 3 stages ahead, and we bat them back to stage 1 sometimes. There are lots and lots of horror stories of folks going to, the big coach or the big voice teacher, especially in sort of like old school European voice teachers, and being told that they can't sing. They have no, we have to tear your, your technique down and start from the beginning because you're not blah, 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 right? So sometimes, I would hope that no independent teachers that I know and that are watching right now are going to say something as egregious as that to a student and going to completely take away their agency in that way. However, we do that in lots of subtle ways, where students come into us and they may voice what they're feeling, and they may voice what is happening in their body. And then we say, oh, that's not what's happening. I hear this, and we imply that what you felt wasn't valuable, or we give them feedback like, ooh, rather than, and also like only smiling when they do the thing we like, and we kind of do this when they don't do the thing we like, right? So again, I don't think anyone is doing this intentionally or with bad intent, if you will, right? I think we're all teaching in the way that we were taught, or we haven't considered some of these things. So understanding where that student is in that self-directed learning model allows us then to choose the kinds of eliciting feedback / the kinds of the ways that we're going to guide folks through to their, finding their own agency. And I think, let's get to the next stage. The next stage, according to this model, which makes perfect sense to me, that's why I'm using it, is, and one of the examples, in the first stage that they use here is that this is coaching with immediate feedback. So this is feedback where I'm giving you the feedback immediately after you've been coached. So you sing a thing and then I say, that was more successful in these ways. Or did you notice that this sound was blah, blah, blah. Sing it again and see if you notice that this was blah, blah, blah. So, or we may ask those kind of directed questions. Informational, and this one says it's all about overcoming deficiencies and resistance. So we're working toward getting them on side with us, where we're the maestro in the room. So the next stage is the student is interested in the learning process and starting to understand that they may have choices. And then the teacher becomes the motivator or the guide. And so we have maybe some goal setting. This is in sort of education in classrooms. We may have goal setting, and we may start to talk about learning strategies, and we may talk and get information from the student about how they're learning and what's happening in their process. So this is likely the stage where we're going to start to, rather than give that immediate feedback that tells you what I'm hearing, without contradicting, hopefully, what the singer feels, but giving that immediate feedback, we're now moving into what did you notice about the breath? What can you observe about your body right now? And directly, what can you observe about your knees? What can you observe about how your throat feels, tension in your throat? What do you observe about where your chin is? I mean, you can ask for all of those kinds of directed, we're guiding them toward. And then you can get, students start to say, they get to be more interested in the actual process and understanding how I'm working on this process, and the fact that I have choices, and I have an opinion, and I'm allowed to ask for something. I'm allowed to have wants and needs. And then the third level is the student is involved in the learning process, highly involved in the learning process, and the teacher becomes the facilitator. And this becomes more along where we're seen as sort of equals in this road, in this journey, where there's the teacher is facilitating awareness. So now the teacher is starting to say, what did you observe? And then if the student is able to say what they observed or what changed, etc., then we're also perhaps directing towards something else as well. Or we're building on that. So we're saying, great observation. What happens if you now, if you keep working, if you keep that observation in mind, and now let's sing this phrase. What happens if you apply it to somewhere else? And what would you like to apply that to? Where would you like to go next with this information? What's the next stage for you, do you think? So that the student becomes highly involved in the learning process. They have this understanding that they have agency, and they are also then able to make these kinds of observations around themselves, right? All we're doing is facilitating that attention. We're not directing it, if you will. We're just making it obvious, if you will. And then the final stage is self-directed, and this is where the teacher then becomes more of a consultant. So the singer is in the studio with you, and they are working more to, they come into the studio and they say, I had a breakthrough, or I've got something that's kind of blocking. I think the way I want to work around this is by doing X, Y, Z, and let me know how this works, right? So now as the teacher, I'm just there kind of like as a consultant, where I just step in and I say, yeah, try that one more time. And what do you think is going to be the next? Yes, that. Try that. And then you're drawing their attention in very, not necessarily. It's almost as if your opinion doesn't matter in the studio, right? You're there just to help that student to find their way to what they already know they want to get to. So they already know where they're going. They already know that there's like a little bump in the road here and they can't quite get through this. And so you're going to pull a few tools out of your toolbox to help them out to get through that, but they already know what they need. You're not there telling them what they need. So when you're asking them, okay, what did you observe about that? They're like, yeah, this, and this. Perfect. Now I can use that in the next thing. So those 4 stages, I think, when we have, I think the vast majority, in an independent studio, I think the vast majority of folks come in to us in stage 1. They are dependent on our opinion. We are the authority or the coach. And we start out with students at the beginning of their self-directed learning journey, and that's not a bad thing, but we have to recognize then that every time I ask how did that feel, they may not be able to give you an answer to that question. And teachers get frustrated all the time, right? People say to me all the time, yeah, but they never give me a good answer. Well, they haven't learned how yet. They're still at stage 1. They still think that you have all the answers. They're waiting for you to give them all of the answers. So we need to be intentional about moving students into stage 2. And yeah, Natalie, this is very interesting too. Natalie says it's very helpful. I'm seeing now that I myself as a student am in advanced stage 4, and so that's what's always on my mind. And then I jump to stage 3 with students before they are there too, because I love stage 3. Yes, exactly. This is part of the thing too about understanding your ideal client. There are lots and lots and lots of folks out there who don't love teaching beginner students, or folks who are on the beginning of their learning journey, and it isn't necessarily because they don't want to work with voices that aren't well coordinated yet. Sometimes it's because they don't want to be the person who is like doing all of that direct input and then needing to get them to the next thing. Sometimes it's because they love being in stage 3 or 4, right? So we've heard about the finisher teachers, and sometimes voice coaches. That's what a vocal coach often is. A vocal coach often is not that stage 1, 2, or 3. Often that vocal coach is basically the consultant. You're there in the capacity to be the consultant to the student who knows what they need, who knows what they want, and they're there just for that like little bit of like, give me that one little tool, or give me that exercise, or give me that extra thing that I need to like get to where I want to go. Yes, absolutely, Natalie. Yeah, I'm not saying you are. I'm just saying like sometimes and sometimes it's because we don't understand that's why, right? So sometimes we think, oh, I just don't like working with beginner singers. And is it because you don't like working with beginning singers, or is it because, oh, thanks, Tiffany, I'm so glad. Is it because you don't like working with beginning singers, or is it because you love to have singers at this stage where they have this agency, and you can ask them, what changed for you? And they're able to like tap in and figure that out, right? So sometimes that's why. And sometimes that's why folks who love working with beginning singers, sometimes those folks aren't necessarily great at getting folks to the next stages, because they love seeing, like, being able to give this information to singers and allow and see how the singers like develop and they change. And especially like at the beginning stages, often you can change so fast, and like all of these great, like, oh, it's amazing. And then we reach a plateau. And why do we reach a plateau? Possibly, not saying all the time, but possibly because we are invested in being the kind of expert in the room, and then allowing and working with singers to develop more agency as we go through these stages isn't my favorite thing. So that's fine. That means then you may want to start to, prepare students to go to another teacher, and that's totally fine. You're allowed. Yes, so, and then I'm really curious about how to get them through the stages, yeah. And you want students who want to move beyond stage one, right? Yeah, exactly. It's a kind of like a Clifton Strengths of teaching singing. Well, I would not be surprised if there was a Clifton Strengths like component to this, whereby if we had, like developer, like I think I have developer in my top 10 strengths, whereas so someone who has developer might be, might be more innately better at like moving people through to like, or maybe not. Maybe developer means like, I don't know. I'm just, there. I bet there's a Clifton Strengths component to this. There always is. Clifton Strengths is so fascinating. And you can, yeah, Tiffany says, I can see that my students are in multiple stages. It's really helpful. Yeah, yeah. Well, just even understanding that there are these stages and that students are going to come in various stages of their own self-directed learning journey, and that there are stages, right? We're not stuck as a dependent, and we're not stuck as teachers. We're not stuck with students who are dependent. If they come independent, that's fine. We're going to move them through the stages now. So one of the ways that we want to, that we can, is there a way for our students to explore that agency themselves, Emily says as well. Yeah. So one of the ways that we want to start to support students as they start to explore this kind of and move toward more agency as learners is we want to start to, this comes back to feedback. I promise it's coming back to feedback. So we want to start to move away from giving immediate feedback to students right after they sing. So that is the way we start. That is a terrific way to start with students, and to start with students as they, especially if they're at the beginning of their learning journey, of their self-directed learning journey, where they sing something and we say, that was great. You did this, this, and this. And I heard this, this, and this. And so now try it again, and let's see more of this, this, and this, or whatever. So that's the beginning of the journey. So then as we're moving students out of that, where they may need that very directed information in order to start to have the coordination, they may not, but I'll say they may need it. Then we start to move into that second stage by asking them for feedback before you give them feedback. We give them a second. We allow them to sing through 4 or 5 times, as we've talked about before. We don't necessarily give them a directive before they sing. We might model something, and then we sing, and then they sing, and so we're modeling. And then we ask them. And then rather than giving them feedback and saying, here's X, Y, Z, we can say, what did you observe about X, Y, Z? Or, so that's a directive, we're directing their attention towards specific things on the journey to being able to ask, and we're not giving feedback, right? On the journey to being able to ask, what did you observe? What changed for you? What was the difference? So we start to kind of take away those little crutches as we go, right? And we start to hand it over to the student. It's really interesting. I'm seeing that I highly value a kind of student who has the capacity to move through stages way more than their actual singing music. Yes, I always thought, than their musical ability. I always thought before that it was just that they were more interested or curious or mature, or perhaps that's also true, but so fascinating now to see it through this learning stages filter. Yes, yeah, so that is also a thing, right? Where we have folks who start to take agency over their own learning, and they start to have this self-directed learning, and teachers who love to get folks to that stage as well. We get to those self-directed learning, that stage, and then they may actually be at a self-directed learning stage that is perhaps higher than their actual skill or their technical skill or their motor learning is. And that's fine too, right? That's fine, because that gives them, if you have agency around, I mean, and the opposite is true too, right? The opposite is true. We can have folks who are very highly skilled, have high motor coordination, but who need their coach or their conductor to tell them whether it was good or not, or to tell them how to change something if it wasn't good. I'm going to put that in big quotes, but to tell them whether it was right. So then they need somebody else to tell them, or the music director, whatever, to tell them what and how to change things, rather than and so, like I said, like if we have someone at the top of their game, where they are skilled and have that coordination, and that, that motor learning, and then they're coming to you as a coach and they're saying, here's where I want to get. I'm like here, and like there's a little roadblock here, and help me to figure this out. I know where I want to go. I know what I need, and I have some ideas about how I want to get there, and now let's just figure this out. Yeah. So I want to also just draw your attention. So we're talking about eliciting feedback and drawing awareness to teaching, to students' process. I want to also just draw your attention to one other thing as I kind of wrap up here. When we're drawing students' attention to something that's happening in their process, at the beginning of the learning process and at the beginning of the skill acquisition, we may be drawing their attention to something really specific and kind of muscular. But as we move along, we're drawing their attention to the outcome of the process, or the outcome of the coordination. So we're going to this is also, this is around learning. This isn't necessarily around self-directed learning, but it is as well. It all ties in. So as we're drawing students' attention to something specific, how did that feel? Or what do you observe? Or what changed for you? We're going to gradually move from responses that give you what changed for you, oh, my tongue was more forward, versus to the sound was brighter. So we want to start to gradually move attention of observation away from the nitty-gritty of the process and into the observation, or the result, the observation of the result of the process. What's the outcome? So we're starting to describe the outcome, and it can be a description in the end. So what changed for you becomes not like, oh, I released my abdomen, or I put more pressure, or whatever. It becomes, oh, the sound was way more intense. Okay. That's what changed for you. Or it felt like I was really engaged. See how that's not specific? It feels like I was really engaged and I really communicated well. So we start to then describe the outcome, and we start to leave the actual process alone. You heard that phrase, trust the process. I know that's a phrase that we hear all the time and likely say a lot in our studios. Trust the process, trust the process. The reason we say trust the process is because as soon as we start to get too focused on the little things that are going into the coordination of the process, yes, more zooming out, the less possible it is for our body to do the coordination well and efficiently. So what we want to do is we want to start to get the attention to the outcome, and then trust the process that got us to the outcome. So this comes back to, I think we were maybe talking about this last week when I was talking about directives maybe, and I've certainly talked about this in other contexts, but where as soon as we, when we think about experts who are choking, right? When experts choke, what are they doing? We think, there are lots of reasons, possibilities, but we think that what's happening is they stopped focusing on the outcome, like where do I want in golf? Where do I want the ball to go? And we started focusing on like, I gotta make sure that this muscle is engaged. So that gets you in here, and then your body can no longer coordinate well, efficiently, and just kind of rely on all of those motor coordinations you built into your brain to do the thing that you're asking it to do. As soon as we start to ask muscles to do something specifically, we no longer trust the process. So if we want to trust the process, we want to start to make those observations and draw our attention to the outcome. But this does come back to not necessarily learning, like self-directed learning stages, but it comes back to where am I in the motor learning stage? Like where am I in that coordination stage? I hate focusing on specific areas to get something done. Yeah, like where am I in that coordination stage? So if you have someone who has not studied singing before, you may need to, or who is a beginning learner in terms of the coordination, then yes, we may need to draw folks' attention to, oh, be careful, make sure that your knees are released, make sure your knees are released, like we may be doing that. And we may also be giving them something to do with that, lots of other things that we may be working on specifically. The closer and closer we get to having, to having an expert level, having a well-learned motor skill, the farther and farther away we get from focusing on the specifics of the process. And the more we get to focusing on the outcome, which allows you to trust the process. Aha. So that is another thing to consider when you're asking students, how did that feel? Where are they in the learning process? And also where are they in the self-directed learning journey? So then we are, we're kind of balancing how much specific things do I need to ask for here? Or when I say, how did that feel? I may say, I don't love how did that feel, to be perfectly honest. I try not to use it. I love like, what did you observe? But then I'll say, what did you observe about the ease of creating that sound? What did you observe about the brightness of the sound? What did you observe about the emotional intensity of the sound? So what's the outcome? What changed? I'm not going to ask what changed in your neck or what changed in blah. I'm going to say, what changed in the tonal outcome? How did the tonal color change? What changed in your body, like in the sensation in your body? What about the effort level changed? So we're drawing our attention again to the outcome of the process. Jennifer says, it's interesting because you're articulating a challenge I see so often. Students maybe focus too much on the outcome too soon. Yes, before they've developed the motor learning they need in order to create the outcome they're going for. That is also true, right? Understanding where the singer is in their acquisition, in their skill acquisition, basically. Where are they in their skill acquisition? And I mean, I firmly believe that even with beginning singers, we can, with folks who are at the beginning of skill acquisition, we can do a lot more like outward focus than we tend to do. But at the same time, we do need to have these directives that are specific toward creating the new coordination, right? I think we need to have these, we have to have attention drawn to the new coordination and how to do that new coordination at some point along the line. And then once that new coordination starts to come in, then we're really focusing on the outcome of it. Like I said, I do think we can, teach well and teach toward the outcome, even in the beginning of skill acquisition. But we definitely have to keep in mind some of the little specific things as well in the beginning. But yes, it's so true. And also sometimes students who are sometimes students are overly, I've talked about this before too, right? Sometimes students are overly focused on like one aspect of the coordination. So my tongue is locked, or my jaw wobbles, or I don't know, like I always have a crack when I go onto this note, or, all of that stuff. Those specific things, or I always sing sharp, or I'm like, my sound is too nasal, or blah blah blah. So we often have students who are actually way over focused on one specific aspect of the coordination, or one specific aspect of the tonal outcome, and trying to fix that one thing, and then the big picture is lost, and they get locked into only focusing on what's happening in their tongue or in their jaw, or whether I've got too much, nasal in my sound or whatever, right? So they get overly focused on that one little thing, and that then takes away from their ability to notice anything globally in their body, to notice anything holistically in their body, and to be able to to be able to observe outcomes. Because the only thing they're observing is like, oh, my tongue was still locked, and how do I get my tongue locked? Well, the way you get your tongue unlocked is by giving it something else to do, like focusing on not focusing on your tongue. so all of these attention, like drawing attention, it can work in a bad way. There's always for every terrific exercise and attention drawing thing, there's always an equal and opposite reaction. Every exercise has a terrible outcome if you do it too much, right? Jennifer says, I'm also recognizing that I'm likely biased toward the motor learning side because I find that so fascinating, and not necessarily the best thing all the time. Yeah, so exactly. And I think that's part of it too, is that once we start to recognize this about ourselves, like where do we lean? Are we leaning toward making sure I'm giving like all of the information and all of the directives? That's totally fine. And there's going to come a stage in that student's learning where it's no longer useful, where it has to move over into them having some, their own self-direction. And then, or are we super focused? I mean, I tend to as well, Jennifer, like I have to be really intentional personally about like not explaining what's happening necessarily and not getting caught in a voice ped lesson versus a voice lesson. Although lots of folks who I work with are with me because they do want that explanation, but giving the explanation at the right time. And understanding that there are stages of learning, and that there are that students need different things depending on where they are in their learning stages, and then understanding what we're more likely to do, and understanding how to Tiffany says, would love to know your thoughts on students who don't seem to be able to desire to move forward from stage one. Students who have studied for years but don't seem to be able to move from me telling them what to do. Possibly from trauma and being told they can't sing early on. Yeah, this is challenging, Tiffany, and I'm not sure that I have a good answer for that, to be honest. That is very challenging, right? So students don't move from that first stage for lots of reasons. So again, like I said, there could be, like, trauma is certainly a very fair reason. They don't think that they have anything to say. They've been told that they shouldn't sing and their voice isn't good, and so they're looking to you for all of the answers, and you're kind of like the savior in this situation, because you're the one who is saying to them, no, you can sing and you do have agency and it's going to be good. But there are lots and lots of reasons why students may not be able to move past that first stage, and some of them have to do with us as teachers, right? Like I said, sometimes we teachers enjoy having a student who wants lots of answers from you, and that's fair too. You're so long as we're recognizing that that's part of what's happening in the process. So I'm not sure that there is I don't know that I have I'm not sure that there are steps which I'm sure you're not expecting that anyway. I'm not sure that there are like steps, but I think if we're able to recognize, okay, I'm consistently giving them immediate feedback, and I'm consistently, telling them how something happened, and I'm consistently doing all of the work to draw their attention to a thing. It may be possible to sort of start to shift that from like 100% me to like 90% in the way that you're interacting. So it may be possible to start to say, and I mean, the whole point here is that you don't want to move too quickly necessarily. It may not be a good thing to move too quickly, but move slowly, so that, and yeah, anyway, so that your next, you can move into like a 90% to 10%, where you're giving 90% of the feedback and you're letting them have like, and they're giving you 10, which would look something like, I thought that this, and this were terrific. What was one thing that you loved about the tonal outcome, about your emotions, about what happened in your knees, about, starting to have more and more of that like give and take. Oh, you're so welcome. Oh, Natalie, I will put some links here for some self-directed learning, those stages. I'll put some links in. There's like educational articles and stuff like that. I don't have any books per se, but I'm sure there are. I'm 100% certain there are books, but I'll throw some articles in. Yeah. And then you're moving from another thing that has been successful that I have used pretty often. Yeah. What did you like about how you sang? Or give me what is one thing that you loved about what you sang, and it doesn't have to be that general. It can be, what is one thing you loved about, or what is one thing you thought was successful, or what is one thing that improved, or you thought was more successful, right? So those little tiny stages. Oh gosh, I was going to ask another one. I was going to say another one. What's something you thought was successful? Oh, and using percentages. So this is one of my favorite ones to use percentages, is for almost anything, because then there's no like sort of right and wrong answer. It's just, we're kind of moving on spectrums and we're kind of exploring. So moving from, you tell me, out of 100, whether that was 50% successful, 60% successful, 70%, or you can do it out of 10 or whatever, and then I'll tell you what I thought. So they're still getting some good input from you, which is what they want, and they're also learning to do this, the self-awareness as well. So you can start to move that along. Basically, anytime we can start to pull our immediate feedback away and start to transition into them being able to provide the feedback, and into them being comfortable and expecting to provide the feedback. It's next to impossible. Comparison questions also, I think, a nice way to transition over, right? Because you're drawing your attention. That's probably stage 2, maybe even stage 3, right? Where you're saying, was it more open or closed? Was it taller or narrower? Was it brighter or darker? And I would actually say, did it feel more open or closed? And I would also probably put it in like, did it feel more open or closed at the front of your mouth? And did it feel taller, or did it feel like, you had a taller space or a shorter space? Did it feel like you were more narrow or more wide? Did it feel like you had a brighter sound or a darker sound? Yeah, I love the continuum, those comparisons. Yeah. And then you can put percentages on that as well, So was it 20% bright and 80% dark? What happens if we find 30% bright and only 70% dark? So you can put the percentages on there and then build on those percentages. Anything you can do. Oh yeah, I was going to say, so it's unlikely that you're going to be able to move from I give you all the feedback and the expectation on the student's part that they're going to get all the feedback from you immediately, and that you're gonna tell them all the things that they're doing, right on over to like, what did you observe? Like it's next to impossible to do that transition. So this transition, as you're thinking about it, I mean, if you know that the transition is possible, and that slow movement forward, where, like I said, percentages, where you're moving from 100% all the feedback all the time down to like, now I'm only doing 80%, and now it's half and half. And by the time that will help them to move through the stages, probably. Yes. Okay, that's enough for today. That was like almost an hour today. It was way longer than I expected it to be. It always is. Yay! Terrific. I was going to talk a little bit about like giving feedback and some of the things. Yeah, a big jump might be scary or jarring. And also, students aren't expecting it, right? So if students have spent their entire learning career with the teacher telling them what they think, or what they did, or explaining how it worked, or what changed, they don't have the language or the resources to be able to draw, to be able to observe themselves, because they've spent their whole lives waiting for you to tell them. So of course they're not going to give you feedback. They're not able to. So yeah, that transition. I was going to talk today a little bit what I initially wanted to talk about, or the reason I said 3 best practices is because I wanted to talk a little bit about like the kinds of feedback we give and what the best practices are in terms of giving feedback. But anyway, maybe I'll do that next week. Tune in next week. Let's see what we got for next week. Take good care. Have a terrific weekend. Happy teaching. Let's end that one. See you later. Natalie, I'll put those links up a little later. Yeah.